I'm here today to tell you that science will fail. I'm here to tell you about questions where we can't even imagine what the answers to those questions would look like. Questions that might be intrinsically unsolvable by scientific methods. But I'm also here to tell you that there is hope. So to begin with, please bear with me. I want you to imagine for a minute in your head, what is it like to be a bat? A bat, what's it like? Think about it. So when I think about being a bat, I think maybe it would involve a lot of flying around, a lot of clicking, some echolocation, maybe a ravenous hunger for some woolly, juicy moths. But is that what it's like to be a bat? How would I know? How would I check that that was what it was like to be a bat? I stole this example from a philosopher named Thomas Nagel, and his claim is that you actually can't know what it's like to be a bat. You can't know that conscious experience. All you can know is what it's like to be a human pretending to be a bat. This is called the hard problem of consciousness. Why is there consciousness? What is it? How can we understand it? What can we write down to understand it? And I'm afraid that science doesn't have an answer to this question. You might be tempted to say, well, if you want to understand consciousness, the way you'd go about that is by understanding the brain. And that could be very useful. It could tell you a lot. You could map out all the neurons. You could figure out how it takes inputs and makes complex decisions and leads to behaviors. But it's hard to imagine how that would lead you to an equation that you could write down on paper, that you could look at and say, yes, that equation predicts a conscious first-person experience. What would that look like? How would you write that down? We don't know. This isn't the only very difficult question that science maybe doesn't have any handholds on. Here are a couple for you. Why is there anything? Why is there anything? And given that there are things, why is it that they obey precise mathematical laws? Why do they obey simple, beautiful laws? Why do they obey any laws at all? Where does a mother's love come from? Or how about magnets? Yeah, explain that, scientists. Of course, we do understand magnets. We have very good, detailed, predictive scientific theories about how a magnet works. It's easy to remember, or it's easy to forget sometimes, that that wasn't always the case. There was a time when a magnet was an intrinsically mysterious thing that we had a very hard time understanding. To give you some flavor of this, I want to tell you the words of a Jesuit philosopher writing from the 16th century, that guy right there, Jose de Acosta. And he writes about compasses. For my part, I would gladly ask university graduates who presume to know so much why it is that when you rub an iron needle on a lodestone, it acquires the virtue of always pointing north. A little later, in the same text about the same topic, he says, "Who can doubt the folly of madness, of wanting to make ourselves judges and subjecting divine and sovereign matters to our puny reason?" Our puny reason. Please don't misunderstand me. Jose de Acosta was a very smart guy. At a time when his contemporaries thought that perhaps the newly discovered Americas was Atlantis, and the people living there maybe were the lost tribes of Israel or ancient Greeks that had washed astray, he understood that that probably wasn't the case. He even predicted the existence of a land bridge from Asia to the Americas in the 16th century. Personally, I think that's kind of impressive, but to him, a magnet was an intrinsically non-understandable thing, something that couldn't be subjected to human reason. In fact, to Jose de Acosta, the only way he could understand magnets was as a divine gift granted by God to the Europeans so that the Spanish could better navigate the world and spread the word of the Bible. Personally, I think Jose de Acosta gave up a little too easily. All right, let me swing back to a question I threw out there a second ago about a parent's love. Why do parents love their children? This seems kind of sacrilegious to ask almost. It's really obvious. Human parents just do. But we can ask this question. Why would a parent love their child? Well, maybe it's because they're cute. We like cute things. We want to take care of cute things, right? But there are plenty of things that are cute that we don't love as much as babies. And besides, that theory would predict that every parent should love the cutest baby on the block the most, not their own. And that's not how humans work. We love our own children. So there's something else going on. So maybe it's because children remind us of ourselves, that they somehow reflect us, and that makes us like them. But wouldn't that theory predict that the truest, deepest, most beautiful form of human love would be between identical twins? Think about it. Does a father resemble their son more or their brother more? Their daughter or their brother? I think this isn't a very satisfying answer. And besides, why would we love things that are similar to us? Why would that be a feature of being a human? Push this question back far enough and it kind of seems like you have to say, this is just how it is. This is how humans are. But in reality, science does give us a really good explanation for a mother's love or a father's love. In a word, that answer is evolution, of course. Evolution is a principle that says if a trait is genetically inherited and it leads to better reproduction and survival, that trait will spread through a population. It can explain human behaviors like why you would recoil from a hot or painful stimulus. To understand this, think about a population where some people recoil and other peoples will just leave their hand over the fire until their hand burns and falls off. Which of those is going to have more successful children? Probably the people who recoil. And so in future generations, there will be more children of those people, and that trait is successfully spread. If that happens long enough, everybody has the reflex. How does this explain a parent's love? That's also pretty simple. Think about a population where some people love their children. They see children and they want to protect them, and other people who not so much, don't care, one way or another. We would expect that the parents who love their children would want to give them things that those children need. They would see something of value that they want to protect. They would give them food, water, shelter, other things that might come at great cost. They might take risks. They might die in defense of that child. Someone who doesn't love their children, probably not going to give them so much, not going to take as many risks. And so we'd expect that in the next generation, the children of the parents who were loving are going to be no more numerous. That trait will be proportionally now more common. And those children, if this trait was inheritable, will love their own children, and those children will also be more successful, and so on, until you get a population like ours where pretty much all parents love their children. Now, I don't want to suggest that literally every question can be answered by science. That's simply not the case. Here's an example. What is it that affixes the stars to the celestial sphere that moves around the Earth? Yeah, that's not a very good question. Right? You can't even ask it without being wrong. So some questions science doesn't answer so much as dissolve away into nothingness. Makes you realize that it wasn't a good question to ask. Okay, let's go back to this question of consciousness, the hard problem of consciousness. Why are we conscious? What is this consciousness thing? How do we understand it? What kind of question is that? It's possible that this is the last kind of question. It's the kind of question that better understanding won't answer. It'll just dissolve it away so that future generations maybe will look back on us and say, wow, those people were really stupid for asking that silly question. Why would they even think that was a question that could be answered? That's possible. That's possible. Certainly, consciousness is a confusing thing. It's something we haven't figured out something about. So maybe we're making a basic mistake. Or maybe consciousness is the kind of question that does have an answer. But to access that question, that answer, we need an insight that we haven't had, perhaps from a very unexpected direction. The question of a mother's love didn't come from studying parents and children. The answer to that question, rather. It came ultimately from the observations of naturalists like Charles Darwin, looking at things like the shapes of the beaks of island finches on the Galapagos. From that, he produced the theory of evolution. And from evolution came countless answers to biological questions that otherwise would have been untractable. So maybe the hard problem of consciousness is like that. We just haven't had the insight yet that we need. It's hard to know that. You can't know that there's an insight coming until you've had it, and we haven't. Maybe the hard problem of consciousness is the first kind of question, one that we'll never really have the answer to, even if it is in principle out there. Maybe it's the kind that science isn't equipped to tackle. Maybe. That's also possible. If, however, you are tempted to give in to that despair, I want you to remember Jose de Acosta and his magnets. I want you to remember the other countless questions that humanity has faced over our millennia of existence, questions that seemed at times to be intractable, and questions that we have eventually, persistently, stubbornly figured out. Thank you for your time and good night.